Hello and welcome to the Action Network Podcast, UFC Betting Preview. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward to help you break down another UFC card going down this Saturday at the Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada. And if you'd like to tell some of the bets that we discuss on today's show, make sure to find the quick slip links in the podcast and the video description, or go to actionnetwork.com/betnow. Main event, 5-round fight in the featherweight division. Lerone Murphy, minus 310. Josh Emmett, plus 260. Fight about minus 150 to go to a decision, plus 120 to end inside the distance. Emmett, 40 years old, coming off of a layoff since December of 2023 when he knocked out Bryce Mitchell. Bet him to knock out Bryce Mitchell in that fight. Love that knockout. Unfortunately, that knockout made Bryce Mitchell start a podcast. So worst result, probably a net negative outcome from that Josh Emmett KO. However, Emmett coming back off of that KO looked good in that fight, but very short. Did go 5 rounds with Ilya Tabor before that. Got finished by Yuri Rodriguez in another 5-round fight. So we've seen Emmett be super durable. We've seen him struggle, with body kicks, ended up getting submitted. And Lerone Murphy, younger man, 6 years younger. He is the better athlete. He's going to be faster, but Emmett carries very significant power. He's basically the Francis Ngannou of the featherweight division, just in terms of knockout rate. Knockdown rate, knockout rate. Emmett is an outlier relative to the division. Hits super hard, and at 40 years old, that power is not going to go away. Power typically stays, increases with age. Speed obviously decreases. Emmett's durability, coming off the long layoff, all significant concerns. Billy, couldn't really find that many interesting angles in terms of betting this fight. I might be interested in Emmett's money line if it floats up a little bit closer to plus 300, but I basically projected the money line, the total, right in line with the market. I made Emmett plus 495 to win by knockouts. The one bet I show value on. It's the one bet we are kind of aligned on in this fight as being the value bet. Emmett by KO at 5-1. I'm also interested in Emmett finish only at plus 155. Not quite as much value, in my opinion, on that prop. But give me your breakdown of this fight, why you landed on Emmett by KO, and any other ways you're considering playing it.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. I said even in the luck ratings that the money line is about right. Kind of what I arrived at was I don't think Josh Emmett has another way to win this fight. So if we think the money line is about right and the majority of his win condition is a knockout, then those lines should be closer. You're never going to make the knockout 50 cents, off the money line or whatever, but they should be closer than they are. I think if this weren't a main event, I probably wouldn't have looked that hard into it. I don't think it's like a great value by any stretch, but given that it's the main event and we like to give picks for that, I do think that's the best option. You kind of summed it up with the power, methods. The only other thing is Lerone Murphy has been dropped a couple times. He got dropped by Zubair Tukhugov in his UFC debut and lost a split decision. And then he was dropped by Dan Ige in his last fight. In a fight you could maybe argue Ige should have won. Like, I think if we graded that fight as a whole rather than round by round, there'd be a compelling case for Ige. That is, of course, not how we do it. So Lerone Murphy's one biggest weakness also happens to be Josh Emmett's clear strength. So, you can bet on that. I do really like the finish-only odds on Emmett. I would have made him a favorite in the finish-only market. Murphy's only finishes are against much lower-level competition. He doesn't press that hard for a finish. He just wins fights. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when we're betting it, I was surprised that Josh Emmett was an underdog on the finish-only. So that one makes sense as well.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the knockdowns for Lerone Murphy twice in his career now. Emmett, outlier knockdown rate. The one thing that I could see happening where Emmett does win a decision is hurts Murphy early, and then Murphy kind of gets scared into a low-volume fight. That Emmett Kattar fight, I think back to a lot, especially in the Apex. Emmett carries such significant power that even when Kattar was keeping the guard high and Emmett was hitting his gloves, the impact of those punches, like the sound of those punches, I think play really well in the Apex, where in a bigger arena with the crowd, etc., like you're not going to hear it as much. So I actually do think Emmett's power could kind of cause a weird dynamic where Murphy suppresses his volume a little bit, creates more of a even striking fight where Emmett's going to be landing the bigger shots, or at least landing the louder sounding shots in the Apex. So I could see Emmett, winning a tight decision. But in terms of like who's going to win a dominant decision, yeah, it's clearly Murphy. Emmett's not going to run away with this fight on the scorecards. If Emmett wins clear, it's going to be via KO. If Murphy wins clear, it could be via wide decision, just with the speed advantage or out grappling Emmett. And I do think that may be the advantage that Murphy has that people don't think about. Emmett comes from a wrestling background. Maybe Murphy, English guy, not able to take him down. Murphy's shown improved grappling. And I just think given the age angle, the declining athleticism, like that could be where Murphy kind of leans on him a little bit in this fight and pulls away with control time, etc. We've seen him out grapple other guys in recent fights, but that's been more so out of necessity too. Not wanting to strike, not wanting to stay in danger at range against Sensen Barbosa or against Danny Ige. If he gets hurt by Josh Emmett, is he going to be able to grapple Emmett and get out of trouble? Like that remains to be seen. So the power dynamic of Emmett, I think, plays in several aspects, not only in terms of getting the knockout, but also in terms of like changing the way that Lerone Murphy is actually going to approach him. Billy, just before we move off of the main event, any live angles, anything you're thinking about from that perspective? Murphy's shown good cardio. Emmett's shown really good durability and cardio across 5 rounds, but his power does carry really well. So, if he hurts Murphy early, you get a decent number closer to pick him on Murphy after round 1. Like any sort of live angles you're considering attacking here.
Yeah, that's the problem. In theory, when you think one guy's biggest win condition is a knockout, typically the other fighter is a live value. But some of Emmett's knockouts have been, or knockouts or knockdowns have been late or towards the end of the fight. So probably not. I guess if Emmett gets a knockdown in the first couple rounds and Murphy's line blows up, that would probably be the only case where, like, if we get Lerone Murphy at plus money after round 2 because he got dropped, but it's probably a 1-1 fight. Judges hate 10-8 rounds, even though they should give more of them. I could see that case, but that's like a pretty specific scenario, so I'm not going in there, with all my tabs open, ready to jump on something right away.
Fair enough. Move on to our fight of the night. Joe Anderson, Brito, around minus 225 at best available numbers against Pat Sabatini, currently as high as plus 200. This fight is minus 240 or higher to end inside the distance, plus 150 at best, or plus 150 at worst, plus 195 at best to go to a decision. I'm going to wait for the Sabatini money line to climb up a little bit more, or just target him live because Brito is the much better striker, Sabatini the better grappler. Fairly binary fight. I do think if Sabatini doesn't die in the first couple of striking exchanges, he does take over this fight with grappling, with cardio over the final 12 and a half, 10 minutes of the fight. So waiting for Sabatini, better number, maybe closer to plus 225, plus 250. We'll wait for fight day. And then Sabatini live after round 1. How I'm targeting this one. Billy, you're kind of thinking along similar lines with Sabatini's money line, but you also like the under 1.5 rounds in this matchup. As I said, a pretty binary fight. Go ahead and give your breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what you said, if Sabatini doesn't die, he should take over. I just don't think he'll need more than 7.5 minutes to find a submission or a win if he can survive the opening flurry. I just published my breakdown for this, and I said this there, but it's a very weird fight where either guy, you kind of need them to break their usual tendency to have a shot at winning. And what I mean by that is Sabatini kind of tends to come out cold, and people that blitz him right off the opening bell has been his only 2 losses in the UFC. Brito is a much better striker, but he inexplicably grapples himself into trouble. And both of his losses in the UFC, debatable though they were, what happened is Brito initiated some grappling, but then got controlled on the ground for large stretches. Happened in his last fight against William Gomi in round 1. Brito, very strong guy, just kind of threw Gomi down and then got overexcited, jumped on his back, and spent the whole round under William Gomi after that. If you do that against Pat Sabatini, you're getting submitted. You're not just going to get controlled on the ground by a French kickboxer, as he did in his last fight. So that is my logic on the under. I had somebody in the Discord ask me about Sabatini's takedown line of over 1.5. I just don't see a scenario where he gets to I should rephrase this differently. The downside risk is he just gets sparked right away, and we're getting a better price on the under. So I think if he gets 2 takedowns, they're probably in the first 2 rounds, and he probably finds a finish it there at some point. And also, a lot of times, Brito's the one initiating the grappling. So you never know how the official scorekeepers are going to treat that. There was an argument that Gomi took Brito down in that exchange. It was officially scored as a reversal. So, and I like that takedown prop in a vacuum, but when the under 1.5 is a better price, I like that. And yeah, Sabatini live makes a ton of sense. Sabatini, if the price gets any bigger, I think I trust him to not get knocked out more than I trust Brito to not instinctively grapple. But we're splitting hairs here. So I don't love the money line at the current price. If it gets any bigger, I'm with you on that, but live is probably the sharpest way to play it.
Seems like a great fight for DFS. What's your relative weight to either guy in DFS, like tournaments this week or lineups in general? Are you using 100% of this fight? Like, are you using one or the other in 100% of lineups? And if so, what's your relative weight on the two fighters?
Yeah, I'll be close to 100% on this fight. I haven't quite, built out all my lineups yet. More towards Sabatini, just because both his ownership and his salary are much lower. So, I think when we get these binary fights like that, even if you don't know anything about the fighters, if you kind of just blindly lean towards the underdog with grappling upside, that's going to work out more often than not. But yeah, it's by far the fight on the card likeliest to end inside the distance. It's reasonably close. I mean, Brito, somewhat heavy favorite, but the other fights in this range have a much heavier favorite. So pretty clear, awesome DFS fight. I have that as my swing fight in the DFS breakdown. That'll be coming out shortly as well.
Let's move on to our favorite underdogs on this card. There's 3 different fights that I want to talk about in this section. The first being Brad Tavares against Gerald Meerschaert. Old guy fight, both 37 years old. Tavares typically good takedown defense and cardio, which is how Gerald Meerschaert beats people, out grappling them, particularly in the 3rd round. However, I don't think Gerald Meerschaert is going to be uncompetitive in the striking here, and he does retain all of the grappling upside. I don't think you can be super wrong playing Meerschaert at plus 185 on the money line and goes to decision at about minus 150 and having the potential to cash Meerschaert decision or essentially breaking even on a Brad Tavares decision. Tavares doesn't carry a ton of power. He's much more of a point fighter, but we've actually seen his durability declining in recent fights. Got knocked out 2 fights back by RoboCop, lost a pretty one-sided decision against the Iron Turtle, where I think more people expected Tavares to be competitive in that matchup. So I think his overall athleticism, effectiveness declining in his later years, where GM3 still beating guys like Edmund Shabazian, competitive with Reinier de Ritter, competitive split decision loss against Andrei Petroski. I still think GM3 has the skills he's had for the past few years. His athleticism, to me, not great, but clearly not declining yet either. I think the cardio maybe a little bit in favor of Tavares, but GM3 has the heart to keep fighting all the way to the final bell. So aside from a GM3 submission or just getting knocked out randomly by Brad Tavares, which I would put much lower than the divisional average here, I like this fight to go over, to go to a decision. I like GM3 to win, either on the money line or by decision. Billy, any thoughts on that fight? And then we'll jump to your 2 underdogs.
Yeah, absolutely wild that GM3 is actually 3 days younger than Brad Tavares, because GM3 has fought like he's 45 the entire time he's been in the UFC. But to your point, there's less of a decline when you don't rely on athleticism to begin with. You can't go down from 0. Not that he's a 0 athletically, but he just doesn't use it. He uses his technique and his grappling skills. So, yeah, I like that. I've been leaning towards GM3. I've just been torn on how to play it, whether we take the sub prop. I do have a question for you about Gerald Meerschaert. 11 of his 12 UFC wins are by submission. He got a body kick knockout 12 years ago or something crazy, a really long time ago. You think he regrets it now, looking back, that he didn't find a way to get a submission in that fight and keep it perfect?
He does have the record now for submissions, right? So now that he has the record, not a big deal. You'd almost want to have the knockout on the record too, but I'm glad he brought up the body kick. That's the main weapon for him in the fight on the feet here against Brad. Brad's going to be trying to box him up. Gerald's going to be trying to stay a little bit further away and kick him to the liver with the left body kick. So yeah, main weapon for GM3 in this fight. And I think he'll be more competitive on the feet than the line suggests, with the grappling upside to boot. But no, I actually, considering he has the submission record, I'd say it's less likely that he regrets also having a knockout on the record. You who wouldn't want to have a knockout win in the UFC? You don't want to say you fought 30 plus times in the UFC and didn't knock anybody out, right? That would be embarrassing. So,
but at the same time, it'd be cool to be every win I have is a submission. You're getting submitted when you meet me, GM3. So I don't know. I think personally I would regret it, but I can see your case as well. We'll have to ask him when he's done fighting and can go on gambling-themed podcasts.
I'd love to get GM3 on here. Cash a number of big plus money tickets for us. I took him at, I think, 5-1 against Murdov. That was one of my favorite bets I've ever cashed. GM3 been good to the Payoff Pitch podcast, to the Action Network podcast, the UFC betting preview. Let's move on to another fight. Now, Billy going to continue to give out underdogs here, but I just want to go fight by fight here so that we're breaking it up nice and evenly and you know exactly which fights we're talking about. Chang Ho Lee, about minus 135 against Cortavius Romeus. This was in your luck ratings earlier in the week. You bet Romeus at about plus 140. It's come into plus 115. I have a bet on this fight that I really like. I'm also going to be targeting Lee live after round one. Billy, you have plus 140 on Romeus going into the fight. Is Lee a live bet that you're interested in making? And then at this point, this price point, would you still play Romeus?
I would definitely still play Romeus at this price point. I just think he should be the favorite. Basically, Lee is coming in off the Road to the UFC series. He is technically 1-0 in the UFC, but that was the tournament championship of Road to the UFC. So it's kind of like the Ultimate Fighter, where it's under the UFC banner officially in that last fight, but you haven't been released into the pool of UFC fighters yet. You're only fighting other people from that tournament. And the people coming out of that tournament have not done particularly well in recent fights. Romeus coming in off the Contender Series, lost his debut proper, but wasn't like smashed or anything. Like, he was fine. He got to do some stuff. Tiny bantamweight. He is 5'4". Reminds me of Torres Finney, also on this card, who is a tiny middleweight with a similar build. But Romeus can get takedowns, and Lee has gotten taken down a lot across his fights in the Road to the UFC, especially in the Apex. I think that helps because it neutralizes some of that height disadvantage. And it's just a higher quality of competition that he's done it again. So I would bet Romeus as long as he has a plus in front of his name. I can see the case for the live bet on Lee. I think you would want to see Romeus have to attempt a ton of takedowns before he gets one to then want to come live on the other side, because failing to take someone down is the most taxing thing in a fight. Successfully taking someone down and making them carry your weight, not nearly as bad. So that's kind of we have to see how this one's going. And this is pretty early on this is for some reason right before the co-main event. That's interesting. Never mind. I was going to say this is early on the card. It's not. You'll probably be tuned in at this point. So yeah, there's a live betting opportunity there, I guess, but I'm not coming into it planning on doing that. I need it to work out a certain way.
Yeah, speaks to the quality of the card when you go, oh, Cortavius Romeus with one UFC fight, which was a loss as a favorite, is fighting in the featured bout on the main card. Oh my. Yep. I like this fight to go to a decision. I projected it closer to minus 200. It's currently minus 150. I think these two mostly just scramble with each other on the mat for 15 minutes. Yeah. The reason why I like the Chang Ho Lee live bet, I actually like his get-up game, and I do think he's going to make Romeus attempt a high number of takedowns. Mm-hmm. And every time he forces Romeus to attempt another takedown, I do think he's going to get a little bit more tired. The resistance may pick up a little bit, and I do think eventually Chang Ho ends up being the guy who's on top in the scrambles by the end of the fight. So cardio advantage for me for Chang Ho Lee over the second half of this matchup. I think Romeus is the better athlete, more powerful, likelier to finish it early. But as they start scrambling, as they start getting tied up for longer stretches, I like Lee to come out on top in the scramble. So Lee live after round one, probably the best price on him. Not super interested in taking a pre-fight stab, even though I do show value, just because Romeus is incredibly athletic. His first round should be his best round. But I bet Gaston Bolaños against Romeus. I bet Bolaños is an underdog. I'm not super high on Romeus in general. I think he's very raw as a fighter. I don't really think he has like a complete game in general. Just a very good athlete and very powerful. But once that athleticism starts to decline, I do think his fights tend to become a lot closer. So we'll see if Lee can survive that opening frame. If he does, I like this to go to a decision. As I said, around minus 200 and get minus 150 currently. Another underdog you like on this card, Billy, and I like this guy by decision. You're taking a different prop stab on him, which we'll get to after your breakdown. But Victor Henry, about minus 205 against Pedro Falcao, plus 185. This fight is about minus 240 to go to a decision. Falcao, though, 5 years younger, and in a fight that's likely GTD, may have the better energy in the third round. I think Victor Henry's two more recent performances, we've kind of seen a reduced version of him in his late 30s. So give me your breakdown on Pedro Falcao, and then go ahead and transition us to the top prop section with your prop bet as well.
Yeah, so the two big things that stood out for me here is Pedro Falcao is a fairly high-level grappler. I don't know if he's done any like high-level submission competition, but like that's his base. That's what he's good at. He's been doing that a while. Victor Henry was submitted in his last fight by Charles Jourdain, which is not a great look. Henry was initiating the grappling, then got himself guillotined, which, like, Jourdain is good at that, so I kind of get it, but I was annoyed that he managed to fall into that trap. And I think Falcao is a much more versatile submission threat. And Falcao lost in his UFC debut, but it was a reasonably close fight outside of him getting knocked down. And he took that one on very short notice. So I just think there's a fundamental underrating here for the younger guy who looked worse than he probably is just due to the nature of his first fight. And yeah, to transition to the props, Falcao by sub at plus 800. I would make that a bigger chunk of his win condition. Henry likes to grapple, so I don't think it's going to be one of those where Falcao has to work especially hard to initiate some grappling. And he's just, I think, pretty noticeably a higher level overall grappler. So the opportunity should be there just because Henry is not going to totally shy away from that. And if we give him enough chances, I think he'll be able to submit Victor Henry. So plus 800, pretty good price on that. I did half a unit on his money line at plus 175 and then 0.2 units on the submission line.
Yeah, I mean, by nature of the fight being 70% implied to go to decision, as I said, like the underdog here, but more so like Falcao by decision at plus 460. Mm-hmm. I made that closer to plus 310. I made the decision, prop a bigger part of his win condition than the submission. Just because highly likely to go to decision, 5 years younger, age advantage. Maybe he can out-grapple Henry for stretches. Unlikely to outstrike him in terms of volume, but I do think he'll be competitive in all aspects of the fight. And as I said, Henry's athleticism, his overall effectiveness seems to be declining now that he's getting into his late 30s. Came into the UFC, huge upset win, is plus 350, plus 400 underdog. I think the market, sort of overrated him a little bit after that, even though he's well-rounded, really good skill set, but came to the UFC very late in his career, well-established regional fighter. Unfortunately, was on the wrong side of the age curve by the time he arrived. I think he's already nearing the end of his MMA career. My top props going to be Luis Garule against Ode Osborne. Ode is a big reach advantage, 9-inch reach advantage here. He's also 2 inches taller. Should be the much more dangerous man in the first round, but Garule has the skill set to cook Ode down the stretch here. Ode never has good cardio. He is big for the 125-pound division, clearly cuts weight to make 125, and as a result, he tends to wane in the second or third rounds, has been finished a number of times in rounds 2 and rounds 3. And Garule inside the distance, round 2 at plus 650, round 3 at plus 900. Same game parlay with an over 1.5. All of those bets interest me. I'm not sure specifically what I'm playing yet, but I will be playing some iteration of Garule late against Ode Osborne. I think he probably finishes him between the over 1.5 and between the under 2.5. That's why I'm targeting those over 1.5 same game parlay or the round 2, round 3 props, etc. But cardio advantage, pressure, pace, etc. Garule live after round 1, inside the distance, and late props. My favorite way to bet that fight. Billy, any thoughts on Luis Garule against Ode Osborne? Garule, a contender series guy. Curious about your thoughts on him. I'll be talking about another contender series debutant in a second, but thoughts on Luis Garule?
Yeah, Garule was interesting coming in on the contender series. I believe his fight against Nick Piccinini, he took on short notice because Piccinini was supposed to have the rematch with Jack Duffy after they had a split. It was a split decision. He showed good grappling in that he managed to keep getting up against a D1 wrestler, but he also got taken down 10 times, which makes him hard to handicap against somebody like Ode, who's going to be far more striking based. So I've been mostly staying away from this one just because I don't really have a good comp in terms of tape I can see on Garule against a fighter like Osborne. I do think he's the better fighter here. It's just kind of a matter of how. The late finish is interesting to me. I would probably go the round 3 or decision or one of the SGPs, just in case he gets a somewhat dominant decision against a guy in Osborne who is barely hanging on to UFC level, for lack of a better way to put that. He's fine, he's decent, but in other weight classes, I don't think he'd still be here. But flyweight is relatively thin, and he can find some spots where he can be of service to the promotion. So I think Garule should win this one. I'm just not confident exactly how.
Let's move on to our best bets. We were aligned on our actual best bet, and this is an actual best bet. Yeah. For me, in terms of the percentages for this card, Talita Alencar currently about a pick 'em price against Vanessa Demopoulos. Alencar starting to move a little bit towards favorite, but the market, public projections, bets, etc., all picking Demopoulos to win this fight about 65% of the time compared to the pick 'em price. I very much know, based on my projections, that Alencar is the quote-unquote sharper side of the line here, just based off of the market activity. Again, 65% of people picking Demo to win this fight in a pick 'em matchup. Now, these may be the 2 shortest reaches of any fighters in the UFC, both under 60 inches of reach. What's Jesus Aguilar is what? Is he at 60? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but he's challenging these two 5'1" women.
He might be at 58 as well. I feel like Aguilar might be in the 50s, but yeah, it's Demo, Talita Alencar, Jesus Aguilar, all like 60 inches of reach or below.
Aguilar
Demo
62 and a
reach
half.
advantage, 1 inch taller, 1 inch reach advantage. You know, she may be the better striker. Alencar is the better jiu-jitsu practitioner here, the better grappler. I think the much likelier finisher of the pair. This fight is juiced to go to a decision, and when Demopoulos' fights do go to a decision, she tends to either win the fight she shouldn't or lose the fights that she should win. So you never know what the scorecards are going to look like once Demopoulos goes off 15 minutes. But I think Alencar, the likelier finisher, happy to grab her at about minus 115. Billy, what did I miss in my breakdown?
Not, I wouldn't say you missed it, but they are both bad at everything that isn't jiu-jitsu. Like, they're just, neither of them are good at any other part of the game, which is fine, like, especially in thinner divisions. But the level to which they are good at jiu-jitsu is just drastically different. Mm-hmm. Talita Alencar got her black belt in 2016 and then won No-Gi Worlds that year. And Vanessa Demopoulos had, like, just started training kind of for fun a couple years before that. And Alencar is younger. So, like, they're both black belts, but one is like the black belt that might be at your local gym, and the other is like a world-class 3-time world champion black belt. If it's a striking match, whatever, somebody might win. We're going to get some grappling at some point. That is really the only clear advantage I see for anyone. Vanessa Demopoulos doesn't really defend takedowns. She has a 27% takedown defense in her UFC career, which is fine if you think you can submit your opponent, because that's where you want to be anyway. If she continues that against Talita Alencar, that is a major problem. I don't know if there's another fighter currently on the roster that I would bet Alencar with a minus sign in front of her price other than Vanessa Demopoulos. And not that Demopoulos is necessarily the worst fighter in the division, but she is just the perfect stylistic matchup for Alencar. Like, this is exactly who you would put to make Alencar look good, because very little striking threat from Demopoulos. She is going to accept the takedowns or shoot for them herself, and she is just so clearly worse at submission grappling than Alencar. So kind of a perfect storm here, I think.
Would you bet Alencar at minus money against Estela Nunes?
Also on this card, yeah, I don't know that. I think Nunes is probably a worse overall fighter, but she has at least like a way that you could see. Like, if she defends 2 takedowns and strikes, she might actually do that, where I don't think Demopoulos does. So maybe, like, it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors thing here, where I would probably bet Demopoulos over Nunes over Alencar, but Alencar over Demopoulos.
Yeah, I think so too.
But yeah, that's an interesting question. Hopefully they don't switch this fight at some point for any reason and make me answer that in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, I think I'd take Nunes over Alencar because I don't like either of their cardio. I think Demopoulos has the best cardio of the 3. That's my concern with Alencar in this fight, is just, gets into dominant position in round 1, doesn't finish the fight, and then like can't get a takedown over the final 2 rounds, and Demo edges her in close striking rounds and wins the decision again. So, not like a crazy big bet here on Alencar, but I do think the much likelier finisher of the pair. And if Demo is going to be interested in grappling, she's going to get stuck on bottom more likely than not. Yeah. She's happy to hunt for arm bars off of her back, arm bars from guard, and she's not going to hit those.
That's not going to work.
Maybe she does. Women's MMA, it happens more than it should, based on the level that these fighters are at in terms of their skill sets. But I'll take Alencar here based on the market weight towards Demopoulos. One other fight I want to talk about. Well, 2 other fights I want to talk about before we get out of here. One I have an actual bet on. Daniel Frunze against Reese McKee. Frunze, another Contender Series guy, beat a 17-1 Russian on Contender Series, denied a couple takedowns, ended up outstriking him. He hits really hard, and I think Reese McKee is going to give him a striking fight. Reese McKee, not generally a guy who's going to land takedowns. He could clinch him up against the fence, maybe control with the cage push a little bit. But McKee is a tall man with tall man striking defense, 42% striking defense in his career. Nicknamed Skeletor for a reason, because he's very tall and lanky. There's not much muscle mass on him. And I think Frunze hits way harder. He's going to land much more damage in this fight. Maybe McKee can cage push. Maybe he can grapple a little bit. But I think Frunze has a good chance to hurt him, win a dominant decision, if not find the finish. So interested in Frunze inside the distance, like his money line at about minus 150 against the guy who does not defend strikes. Thoughts on Daniel Frunze coming off a Contender Series, Billy? And then we're going to get to one other DWCS guy before we get out of here.
I have less thoughts on Frunza than I do McKee because he is a very interesting / challenging fighter to break down. If you watch him in Cage Warriors, he looks like the second coming of Anderson Silva. He's 5-1, or he's 6-0 in Cage Warriors, 5 knockouts and a decision, multiple title reigns. And like, yes, it's a lower level of competition, but he looks so good over there. And then he fights lower level UFC guys who, like, in theory, are not that far away from upper level Cage Warriors guys. Like, that should be a fairly similar level. And looks terrible. So I don't know if there's like a psychological thing, if fighting away from England messes him up. Like, I don't know what it is. And it's to the point where I think I just can't bet him or against him. I can't bet his fights because it doesn't make any sense to me. And I would rather just not continue to lose money on Reese McKee. Well, you would never have lost money betting against Reese McKee in the UFC to this point, but I would rather just stay away. It doesn't make any sense to me how it happened, so I am entirely scared off of that fight.
Yeah, it might just be an athleticism and strength thing, like going against other regional level guys. Like, you know, there's no athleticism advantage for them, so he's fine in terms of the striking. But once he gets up to a higher level, may struggle with athleticism, may struggle to handle the power from opponents. Clearly, he does not defend strikes well, so.
But like, Alex Morono is not a better athlete than the guys fighting for the Cage.
I bet McKee in that Morono fight too.
Yeah, I did too. Not just Alex. Who else? Angelus is a better athlete. I'll give him that one. Mm-hmm. I don't think Frunza is necessarily a better athlete than the higher level Cage Warriors fighters. But in my head, I'm still like, this fight has the UFC, logo in the center of the cage, so Reese McKee therefore must lose. Even though like his skills in theory suggest that he should win that, if you watch his fights outside of the UFC. So I don't know, but that was a very long-winded non-answer. But it's a weird spot.
No, I think the context is good. 5-inch reach advantage. He does have, very good technical striking. It's just the defense, I think, is what does him in ultimately. But should be a fun fight. I think Frunza's hittable too. Frunza is going to make it exciting. So should be a fun fight between those two. The last fight I want to talk about before we get out of here, got to talk about Torres Finney, because you taped him 3 times at Contender Series. I'm not sure if you bet any of those fights that he was in, but Torres Finney finally earned his contract to the UFC. And frankly, the UFC could not have given him a softer landing spot for his first matchup, facing a guy who lost on The Ultimate Fighter, who was out-grappled on The Ultimate Fighter, and Robert Valentin. Do you have any thoughts on Torres Finney against Valentin? There's no bet for me on this fight. I maybe would lean to go to the decision, but I'll be rooting for a Torres Finney finish. What do you see here?
Yeah, Contender Series Hall of Famer Torres Finney went 3-0. I think I bet on him in some way, shape, or form in all 3 of those fights. I know I took him to win inside the distance the one time he went to a decision, which was very frustrating because he finished his first Contender Series fight. They didn't give him a contract. They brought him back. He won a decision. Dana complained that he didn't finish the fight. Like, brother, he's already done that. He did that the last time. Very strange. I don't know what happened there. The couple spots I was like interested in before I saw the lines, Finney's point spread -3.5, but it's -180, which like I think we should be getting a better discount on that. And then takedown props is set at 3.5 for plus money. If it were 2.5, I would really like it because I could see him getting a takedown and controlling on top in every round. I don't see Valentin Frey having the get up skills to give Finney an opportunity for a 4th takedown. So I guess saying that, you would say the under 3.5 makes sense, but that's -165 because those player prop markets are heavily juiced. So no bet. Finney is my favorite DFS play by a pretty wide margin on this slate. The line is shifted towards him pretty heavily. He's a good bit cheaper than the other heavy favorites, and he's either going to get a finish or a bunch of takedowns in control time, or some takedowns in control time. So that is where my interest. I'll probably just be 100% on Finney. I'm not playing a ton of lineups this week, but yeah, he's a tremendous DFS play because it's takedowns or finish, and those are the 2 things we want.
That'll do it for our UFC betting preview. You can find more UFC betting content from both Billy and myself on actionnetwork.com and in the Action Network app. And if you'd like to instantly tell some of the bets that we gave out on today's show, look for the Quipslick links in the podcast and the video description, or visit actionnetwork.com/betnow. Don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app and sign up for Action Pro for immediate access to expert picks and analysis. Best of luck with all your bets this weekend. Enjoy the violence. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.